not going to dissuade anybody from having those thoughts. And Rupert Lowe, who I'm about to say good morning to, morning Rupert, is about to say probably something similar. Let's hear his reasons and find out why he thinks that. It's a perfectly legitimate debate to have, I think. Rupert, very good morning.
Morning, Mike. How are you? Nice to be on your show.
Yeah, very good to see you.
It's not often I have to correct you. I didn't actually call for the death penalty. I called for a debate on whether or not the death penalty should be restored in exceptional circumstances like this one.
Yeah.
So I think it is time for a national debate on this. You know, this is an example of the malaise that Britain's currently suffering. And this is also a failure of multi-government departments and quangos who, as you and I know, as soon as something goes wrong, you know, Prevent being an example of one, that they should have picked this up if they were doing their jobs properly. There are other people who should have picked it up, not least the father, who I did post about. I mean, if you're living with somebody like this, don't tell me when you look at his bedroom you can't work out that there isn't something wrong. So
and also a week before this event, he called him and pulled him out of a taxi because he believed he was on his way to a school to massacre a load of school children. What the hell was he thinking? Why did he not call the police at that point?
Yeah, so look, there's in my view, I said it in Parliament, there's blood on the hands of some of these agencies, and you and I know they run round in ever-decreasing circles and blame each other. And none of them are held to account, which is disgraceful. I mean, my view on this, totally, Mike, and I think we've got to go back to the grooming gangs, which, as you know, my team and I kicked this off again when we read the transcripts of some of those court cases. It's rather like, you know, the human body, when it's not functioning properly, you get a sore tongue. And I think the grooming gangs are the sore tongue of Britain, showing us that as a country we're out of sorts.
Yeah.
I mean, I blame, I'm afraid, Tony Blair and his mob, who were elected, as you know, in '97 after John Major's relatively short but disastrous 4 years in power. So they undermined the British Constitution. They're the ones who, as you know, Cherie Blair is a human rights lawyer. Keir Starmer's fingerprints are all over this. He was a human rights lawyer in '05. These people systematically undermined our Constitution, and I think in an attempt to cuddle up to Europe and create Britain as another sort of part of the European Union, they undermined our sovereignty by creating a fertile environment for mass legal and illegal immigration.
Yeah.
So this is where it kicked off. You then had Keir Starmer, who was Director of Public Prosecutions. His fingerprints are all over some of this stuff when he was running with Director of Public Prosecutions. Sadly, the Tories failed to deal with it when, you know, either in the coalition where Cameron was in, or when Cameron had power, and then when May had power, and then when Boris obviously had his 80-seat majority, actually illegal and legal migration skyrocketed. So, I mean, we're out of sorts. I'm doing more work on this grooming gangs situation. I think it is a national scandal. It's, as I said, it's a stain on our history. Yeah. And, you know, I think we must have a national inquiry with statutory powers. I'm speaking to more and more whistleblowers. I've got one coming down to see me on my farm this morning. And if the government doesn't instigate this national inquiry that I think is now well overdue, it's my intention to play a part in ensuring we get a full documentary on this issue, where the victims have a chance to actually tell us their story. And we can also learn more about the failures of the police, of local government, of local politicians, and almost every organ of the state, for whatever reason, whether it's a fear of racism, whether it's a fear of being called racist, whether it's a fear of, as we know, these Asian bloc votes. The first thing we need to do as reformers when we get in is to remove this ridiculous postal voting system and make it very difficult to vote by post unless you absolutely need to. So there's lots of things we need to learn from this, and the country needs to cleanse itself of this stain on our history, and it can't do it unless it's fully exercised and the public actually understands what's happened. So I'm not going to let this drop. I think this is symptomatic of a hugely concerning malaise which Britain's currently going through, and we have to sort it out.
Right. And it's also a malaise of truth, isn't it? Because you've got Keir Starmer, who made his statement in Downing Street on Tuesday about this whole Southport situation, in which he said so many things which were contradictory to one another. He said, we must have transparency in government. He's not transparent. He said, you know, I withheld information because I feared that it would prejudice the trial. Completely and utterly misguided and untrue. For somebody who is supposedly an expert in the law, he is woefully inadequate about how the law actually works. He then said that we must be unencumbered by, you know, cultural complications, and we shouldn't allow that to interfere with anything that we do. But it interferes with everything that they do. So, I mean, you know, he's giving out this message on the one hand that we're going to change things, we're going to change the definition of terrorism, we're going to change the way that we deal with police investigations into ethnic minority crimes, and yet that's not happening.
Well, my view on Keir Starmer is that he's a deeply duplicitous man, Mike.
Yes.
I personally find what Labour are doing
that's absolutely spot on.
To be criminal.
Yeah.
I think what they're doing is misguided. And, you know, I encourage everybody, where they see things that are not being done correctly, challenge them. Don't let either local or national government get away with this ridiculous agenda that they seem to be pursuing, where they've declared war on the farmers, on the private schools, on the businesses, you know, and the pensioners, of course, which is in my view criminal. And meanwhile, they're dishing out lots of money to overseas farmers. And just watch what the DWP does. They hand out taxpayers' money like confetti.
Yeah.
So the problem is the state, Mike. It's not the private sector.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is progressively destroying the private sector in order to create a dependency culture which they think is going to vote Labour all the time. So they're deeply unpleasant people. And when one of them looked me in the eye the other day and told me that in his opinion the public sector was often more efficient than the private sector, I thought, well, we're all wasting our time.
Dear me. That's unbelievable. Let me just take you back before I let you go, because I know you've got other things to do. To go back to the death penalty conversation, in terms of the debate that you wish to have, what would be your position in terms of how we would even begin to think about administrating something like the death penalty? I mean, how would we do it?
I haven't got the answer to that, Mike, but I do think, as the lady on your show said earlier, for somebody who commits such a heinously unpleasant crime as this, and as you say, some of the stuff that came out of sentencing yesterday was almost, you know, unfathomable as to how an individual could do that. But I come back to his father. I don't know why his father was here in the first place. That's never been made clear. And if he was under 18, which I think he was by a relatively small amount of time,
13 days, I think.
then obviously the issue of parental responsibility must come into this. So I think there's reasons now to have a serious national debate for reintroducing the death penalty in exceptional circumstances. And I think this is an exceptional circumstance. So I personally would have no problem participating in that debate. I would listen to all the arguments and then make a decision. And I think that's how good government should work.